Hey guys, spoke with Hal Feder, business intermediary today about the confidentiality issue when it comes to selling your business, how that comes into play for the owner and how the intermediary helps navigate that process with multiple players. Hal's a wealth of knowledge with all things sell side transactions. So we had another great conversation with him. Hope you enjoy it. Dig into it. Disclaimer from the always present legal team. Podcast conversations don't necessarily reflect the views of BizNexus Incorporated. Everything you hear is informational news and updates from around the industry. We're not recommending any investments. We're not offering any investment advice. Be sure to do your own homework. All right. Thank you, Hal Feder, joining us today. We're going to talk about confidentiality in this one. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Adam. Great to see you again.
Likewise. Yeah. So I think for this workshop, if we could just run through confidentiality, why this matters, why it's important for a seller. I think we're mainly going to be speaking to the business owners who are first-time sellers, right? They've been out there operating a company for, who knows, 30 plus years. They're good at what they do, but they've just never gone through the sell process. And obviously they're at a disadvantage if they're going through this for the first time, and then they're meeting with all of the buyers and the intermediaries and the accountants and the lawyers who are doing this day in and day out. So we want to prep that seller for the transaction specific issues that matter. And we're just trying to be a good river guide to help them navigate and be aware of the issues that could pop up that are important. And obviously confidentiality is a huge one. So let's just kick it over to you.
Yeah.
Start with very basic. Why does it matter?
Yeah. It's, think about it, Adam. Like you said, 30 years of building value, working, building a team, developing competitive advantage in the marketplace. And you've got this valuable business, this offering, and you want to tell people about it, but you want to protect confidentiality while you do it. It seems like a paradox, How do you sell something without telling someone about it? But there is a right and a wrong way to do it. And so why is it important? Well, clearly with employees today, there's a talent war going on, right? I mean, you got to keep your employees. So one reason you want to protect confidentiality is you don't want employees, and you say, well, if the employees are loyal and they'll stay. Well, it's fear of the unknown, right? So they know you, but they don't know a potential new buyer coming in. So with the talent war that's out there, you don't want to give them any reason to kind of shop around, right? So fear of the unknown, right? So you really want to keep your employees with you. You want to keep them focused on the task at hand while you're marketing the business. So employee flight is really a critical issue. You also
can I just pop in there too, just not only for losing your employees, but for like losing your numbers. I mean, as you move in towards a sale, you've got to keep things tracking up. And if you lose key employees and your numbers get hit, those buyers are going to take full advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. Performance and focus on the task at hand. Obviously, you got the water cooler conversations where, they're talking about the sale and they're not talking about what they need to be doing to perform and keep the business on maximum throttle. So clearly focus and prioritization and attention to the business. It's a distraction. It's human nature to talk about what's going to be happening in the background. And so you want to avoid that at all costs. If it does get out, and I had a situation come up a couple of weeks ago on a deal, the word got out. There was an attorney that sent a misguided missile and fax into the dealership. And one of the employees saw that this deal was in motion, right? So now, one person knows, and then in a half hour, 20 people know, right? Guess what I found out? So the sellers call me. I'm representing the sellers here, and we have to put a wet blanket on this thing. So fortunately, the seller, there's two of them, two brothers. They met with the leadership team in the store. It happened to be a dealership, an automotive dealership, and had some private meetings, and then had a little bit of a team group meeting, and said, "Hey, look, we're not going to live forever. We are looking at potential buyers of this business, and as leaders of this team, we would ask that that you know that and appreciate that, and recognize that we are going to find a new leadership team that will build on what we've already built, and that will share our core values of professionalism and customer service, and the future is very bright. You're going to be growing, and it's going to mean more revenue, more profits, and better job security. So work with us. Let's keep a positive attitude. Let's stay focused on the business. And we're going to update you at the appropriate times in this transaction. But we would ask that you and your team stay focused on the task at hand while we do that. And it went, because they were proactive before the rumor mill got maximum velocity, they were able to settle the organization down. And of course, they have great respect and relationships with their people, and their people really appreciated it. They turned what could have been a very bad negative situation into a positive situation with the way they handled it.
Yeah, I was going to say that. And so you helped coordinate this, obviously, right?
Yeah.
So they called you, right? So you're an intermediary. We should have led with the fact that you do have this automotive niche. That's why you're dealing with dealerships that send faxes, right? Ideally, that fax machine, if it still exists, ideally that's in a closed office with the 70-plus-year-old owner who's running the company. Exactly. But that aside, so the lawyer botched it, sent the fax. They don't know what to do from a transaction standpoint. They call you as their river guide, their transaction river guide. Yes. And you help them with the messaging to avert the crisis with the employees.
I said, look, I wished it hadn't happened, but it did happen. My job is to remove the obstacles in the deal. Here's the messaging. And I put down 6 or 7 bullet points in an email. They read them, and they started meeting individually with the leadership team. Then they brought the leadership team in together, and then they asked the leadership team to talk to their teams and deliver that message. And then they made themselves available for private one-on-ones when employees came in and wanted to talk about it.
So that sounds like you diffused the bomb, which is great. And that's, I think, a great plug for working with an intermediary, if you can be there to help, navigate those types of things that are going to pop up in the transaction. But what would be like the right way to do this? So if I'm an owner and I want to get ahead of this, should I be thinking about telling my C-suite, hey, we've got a transaction, and framing it the way that you just went through? Like, this is going to be a big opportunity for everybody. Yeah. You're really stating why you're doing this so that you don't get caught off guard. Because especially in this environment, today is November 17th, 2021. We're in this environment where it is just so hard as an owner to keep and retain talent in any form or fashion. So with that being a huge risk right now, do you want to get ahead of this?
I think each case is different, Adam. You have to kind of meter the messaging and the timing of the messaging around your team and around where you are in the deal. This was at a very preliminary stage in this deal. So the ideal situation in this thing would have not had anybody be aware of it, not even the controller, the CFO, or the top level managers. It was just too early. But the word got out, and we had to dismantle the rumor mill before it got going and got counterproductive. To answer your question, though, I think when you do have a deal that looks like it's going to go, and you've got some pre-qual from the bank, and you've got the franchisor may be looking at the deal, and then you do want it. There's a point in the sale where you actually need your management team to help execute this sale. Yeah. Like an office manager or control, you're not going to be able to sell any business without your office manager and your controller helping you. Yeah. And so don't wait till the last minute before you have that conversation. Give them the benefit of planning so that they can set up close of the month, close of the business, and affect a successful transition.
So you're in this day to day. So a lot of what you're saying might seem intuitive to you, but for a first time seller, not so much. Like, yes, every business is unique, but if there are steps, right? So what you're going through right now, you need to bring in your management team. At what point should you be thinking about that as an owner? Like, if I'm going to start the process, I'm, maybe reaching out to a broker, I'm engaging with a broker. At what point should I think about, well, I'm going to let the inner circle of the company in on this, and then we're going to open it? Like, what are the proper steps, if there are any, for confidentiality?
Well, typically you got the LOI, the letter of intent, which is non-binding except for confidentiality and exclusivity for the buyer. You want to be under contract. You want to have a signed and executed purchase agreement before you start even thinking about letting anybody know about it, because it's just non-binding. It's too dangerous and too risky to do so. Now, again,
so to clarify again, for a first-time seller, your LOI, you've thought about selling. You've gone and you've potentially engaged with a broker. You've run through evaluation. You've done a whole lot of stuff before you start, before you send this document that is an agreement to, potentially date exclusively, right?
Yeah. So the broker would have analyzed the business, would have come up with a valuation, would have had an alignment with the seller, would have engaged the seller in a contract, would have developed a teaser ad. I'll talk about a teaser ad in a moment. The teaser ad will attract a buyer, a prospect. The prospect will look at the material. Well, first of all, we'll sign an NDA, and I'll get through the steps of protecting confidentiality in a second, but they'll have seen the numbers, if you will, and then put together an expression of interest, which is this letter of intent. Again, non-binding on either party, but for the interest, for the expression of interest, the seller will grant the buyer an exclusivity, meaning they'll have an opportunity to look deeper into the business for a 30 to typically 45-day period. Spend some money with a lawyer to develop a legal contract, okay? At that legal contract, there's money exchange, there's an earnest deposit that's put in place, and that's when the deal becomes a deal, a legal deal. And if you have a franchisor involved, you then will engage the franchisor for their approval. But that's when it's, I guess, green light to start bringing in some of your management team to the extent that you're comfortable doing so, and talk about the deal.
Got it. So that's when the lawyer can send the general facts to the entire company.
Yeah, it's just, yeah. Yeah, it was unfortunate, but
Yeah,
you know, it's actually worked out well. Now, to play this thing out, today some of the top managers are corresponding with the new owner, and there's great rapport that's being built up, and we haven't even closed yet, right?
Yeah.
So we've kind of really fast forwarded the transition, you know, keeping our fingers crossed that the franchisor will approve this guy, which I think he will. They will. And so we're ahead of the game, but it could have really been disastrous. Let me take it
for hiring a good broker.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the broker it's experience, right? I mean, so the second kind of danger zone is clients, right? You don't want the clients to find out that the business is for sale, because the clients could take their business elsewhere, particularly if it's a service-oriented business, you know, because if they think that they're going to buy something from you and you're not going to be there to service it, they might have second thoughts on buying from you in the first place, right? So again, you don't want the word to get out, but if the word gets out, in this case, like the dealership example, now they're sending out notices with their accounts receivable billing that says, hey, this dealership is in transition. Don't worry, it's not going away. Nothing's going away. The dealership's going to be around. The people in the dealership are going to be around. We're going to be here. There is going to be new ownership. That new ownership shares the core values of the old ownership. Everything's going to be okay. So they're trying to now proactively manage their customer base around the fact that there was this leak, this, because guess what? Once somebody in the dealership knows, somebody's spouse in the dealership knows, somebody's spouse has a friend, it's a small town. Now the clients know, right? And so if you don't go out and proactively have a communication message for the clients, you have the same problem that you did with the employees. But ideally, you don't want clients to know, because you don't want clients at flight. Yeah. You also don't want your competition to know, right? Oh, you don't want to buy from XYZ dealership. Didn't you hear that they're for sale? You're going to buy that car, but you don't know who's going to service that car. But you know that I'm going to be here for the next 30 years to sell your car. Buy your car from me, and know and rest assured you'll have a peace of mind that I'll be the one to service your vehicle. So the competition will use your sale against you and plant seeds of doubt with the clients. And they'll also start to go try to knock on your employees' door and steal your employees.
And just to get back to why that matters for a seller, any loss of performance, right? You're talking week over week over week, month over month over month. As you get close to the goal line, if you lose a key client, right? If you lose a key employee, the buyers are going to take full advantage. And that's why all of this matters, because it's going to be reflected in the valuation. Yeah,
no question about it. Especially if you've got a high degree of concentration around a couple of key buyers, right? Absolutely critical. It's going to damage everything that you've worked 30 years to build. This has got to be top on the priority list for the broker. If he does anything else, he's got to manage this. It's your wealth. It's your value, and it's everything you've worked for.
Hey guys, so if you haven't checked out the BizNexus marketplace, get in there, please do so. We've got about 7,000 active businesses for sale at any given time. We're constantly adding new listings and deleting existing listings to maintain inventory quality. You get in there, you set up your free account, you set up your acquisition preferences, and you can start getting matched immediately with deals and the professionals who can help you with your buy side or sell side transaction. So we're really trying to help make the match, facilitate the match to get more successful transactions done. We're trying to really do a service for the entrepreneurial community, whether you're trying to grow through acquisition, buy your first business, or get to the point where you're actually ready to sell a business. Everything that leads up to that, it's a long process. Typically, you should have years of planning in advance of an exit. So it's not just for if you're selling your business now, it's for if you want to get your ducks in a row and get yourself prepped for a great acquisition when that time comes. So biznexus.com, that's our general marketplace. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks.
Another key associate would be your suppliers and your partners. Okay. These are people that are, supplying you with goods and services that you're using in your business. Why don't you want them to know? Well, you might have a volume program in place with them. So, okay, wait a minute, they're not going to hit their number. So, it might cost you more to get those products and services because they know you're not going to be around in the future. You're not going to have a longer term relationship that you had in place. That's the extreme example. But again, the more people that know, the more at risk you are for damaging the valuation of your business during this critical part in your business history. So you want to
recommend, and I know every transaction is different, but for a seller, what do you recommend? At some point, a buyer is going to want to know who those customers are. You can't just say, ABC, and you're going to have to reveal that.
Yeah.
I don't want to step on you. So if you're going there, then.
No, so there's a right time and a right place for everything. So now that we're under contract with the buyer, we're more comfortable giving the buyer intimate details on our business. Okay.
Right.
So there's kind of due diligence between the letter of intent and the contract. And then there's more due diligence after the contract is signed. Like, tell me what you're paying your employees. Share with me the intimate details of your tax returns. Tell me about this real estate, this environmental issue that came up 6 years ago on the real estate. So there are different levels of information that's shared. And that's part of the protection of confidentiality step that I'll get to in a minute. You want to meter out the information flow to the buyer as a protection of confidentiality. You don't want to give the buyer everything on day one. You want to give them enough to where they feel comfortable taking the next step. Okay?
And so typically, if you're under LOI, a buyer, is probably going to ask you these questions, going to see what they can get. But you're saying that you're not giving out the details of those suppliers, of those customers, of your employees until it's under contract.
Yeah. I mean, I use a dating analogy. This is stupid, but I want to go steady with you. That's the LOI. The contract is, okay, we're engaged. I gave you a ring. I gave you an earnest deposit, right? And the closing is the wedding. So think of it as a relationship, I'm going steady. I'm engaged. Okay. I'm not talking to anybody else now. I'm not dating anybody else now. And I'm going to get married at the closing. Okay. I'm going to sell the business at the closing. So when you think of it as a relationship type, journey, the sale of a journey, you get more intimate as you get more mature in that relationship. It's the same thing with buying and selling a business.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you hit on something else. Performance and focus is another reason why you want to protect it. And then I guess the last point I'll make is confidentiality is a two-way street. Okay. It's not all about protection of the business. It's also protection of the buyer. The buyer is giving you personal financial statements. They've talked to you about their goals. The buyer is presently owning a business or working for somebody, and they want to make sure that they manage the departure of that potential business in a professional way. So I've got the guy, I'll go back to the dealership example. He's not a business owner right now. He works for a big dealership group, right? And he's doing really well with that dealership group and well thought of, and he wants to leave that job to buy this other dealership in a professional way. So where there's risk on the seller of the business and the valuation of the business, there's also a personal risk for the buyer. So think of confidentiality as a two-way street, and that seller needs to also help the buyer protect their confidentiality with whatever other business dealings that they have going on.
Interesting. Right? Any added thoughts for strategic? So if that guy, in this case, hadn't been working for another dealership, but actually owned another dealership, we're in this environment where you have companies are going through acquisition. There are a lot of, in this COVID environment, there are a lot of deals out there. Companies that have strong cash flow, they've been on the hunt for the past 12 to 18 months. So that's a really active space. If you're looking at potentially opening up this kind of information to a competitor, is there anything else, any added level of confidentiality that you typically recommend to your clients in that regard, or how do you play that?
Well, the buyer, that's that exclusivity period. They don't, they're going to be spending money with an attorney to develop the contract. They're going to be spending time. They're going to be hiring, tax personnel and wealth advisors to look at this deal. And so part of why they want exclusivity is they want the opportunity to purchase this business without outside interference, right? And so the seller obviously doesn't want to give exclusivity because they want to keep shopping until they know they have a deal. But again, you got to be an intersection of interest here in order for them to have a deal. And so the seller's got to give up some typically exclusivity to allow the buyer to get in a position to develop the contract. So the buyer doesn't want the news on the street either, because it could invite, again, it's non-binding. Okay. So somebody can come in and beat the deal. Okay. If it gets on the street. And so the buyer's got a vested interest in confidentiality as well, certainly between the LOI, the letter of intent, and the purchase contract. Generally, when you sign the purchase contract, it's a legal contract and you don't have to worry so much about exclusivity. Although you still do, right? Yeah. So, yeah. But yeah, it's an interesting. People don't think of confidentiality on the buyer's side, but it's a real concern also on the buyer's side. So it's a two-way street. And I think if both buyer and seller, what's that?
It's like looking for a job when you're already working with somebody. You don't want it to get out because
exactly.
Yes,
the perfect example. Yeah. So So we've talked about employees, we talked about clients, we talked about the competitors, we talked about supplier partners, we've talked about performance distractions, and we've talked about the two-way street nature of confidentiality for buyers and sellers. What are the steps to protect it? Well, first, the teaser ad has to be descriptive enough of the business, but not too descriptive. You never name the business, you never name the exact location of the business. And you can put some words in there, and I've done this. I've made this mistake. 70-year-old dealership in Northeast Pennsylvania or in Southwest Georgia. Well, people will Google Southwest Georgia dealership, 70 years old. Oh, there's a picture of the guy having the 70-year anniversary. Oh, that's the deal. So you got to be careful. You got to be careful with how descriptive you are. Obviously, the more descriptive you are sometimes makes the description of the business more attractive, right? And we're all in sales, we want to sell it. So, but you gotta be careful. There's a time and a place for that. So a well-developed teaser that gives enough information to get somebody interested, but not too much information to reveal the business is what you're trying to do with a teaser, okay? That's the first thing. Now somebody sees the teaser. How do you protect confidentiality? Well, you need a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA, confidentiality agreement. This is a written commitment that you're going to protect the information that's not in the public domain we're going to share with you as a buyer. We're going to give you more information. So you sign that, the broker collects that. I also ask for a personal financial statement. Why do I do that? For a couple of reasons. One, I want to see that the prospect has the financial resources to buy the business. I also want, and this is just maybe psychological, but I want a little sweat equity from the buyer. Are you really just kicking tires? Or are you really serious about buying this business? If you won't take the time to send a financial statement to me, then maybe you're not really serious about buying this business.
Yeah.
So, and if they refuse, the deal stops. Even if they're Warren Buffett. I'm sorry. I'm using that as an extreme example, but you got to demonstrate to me before I share the business's financial information with you. You got to share your information with the seller to make sure that you've got the financial capacity, because time is an infinite resource, right? None of us have enough of it. And why waste your time? Why waste the seller's time on something that you can't afford? And sometimes you can afford the business, but you can't afford the working capital to put in the business. So as a broker, I'm not just looking to satisfy the bank's requirement for the down payment. I'm making sure that you've got enough working capital to buy the business. Okay. So that's another level. And then the third level that I use is a personal interview. So if you look good on paper, you sign the NDA, you got, this looks good. The financial statements look good. Now I'm going to interview you for 15, 20 minutes. Why do I do that? Now I'm looking to see if you're operationally qualified to buy the business.
Yeah.
All right. What are your goals? What are you looking for in the business? At this point, I know the business pretty well. They don't. So I want to hear from them what they're looking for in a business. And if it matches what I'm going to deliver in that business, then this seems like a good fit, right? And if they can demonstrate to me that they're operationally capable of not just buying the business, but running the business, right? Who's going to run it? Oh, you're just going to own it? You got a general manager? Who's the general manager? The reason I'm doing this is because the bank's going to do this, right?
Yeah.
The bank's not going to lend money to someone that they don't think can run the business and pay off the debt service. So financial qualification, operational qualification through an interview is really important.
Yeah, and going back to the beginning of the conversation, if you're dealing with a C-suite or a bunch of managers who are keeping an eye on who this next potential buyer is, if you let the wrong person in the door, then they might start looking elsewhere. So
there's no question. So yeah, exactly.
We should say too, again, we're coming up at the end of 2021, but there are so many new buyers in this market, and there's so many of them are unqualified. I mean, anyone can put up a WordPress or a Squarespace site and call themselves a buyout fund. But when it comes to actually having committed capital, right, investors who are backing you to make an acquisition or qualifying for an SBA loan or having those funds, that is, there are a lot of buyers out there who do not have that, but they're actively looking and spending the time to look under the hood. And so that's a real risk from a broker standpoint, but from a seller standpoint, certainly if this is a one-shot deal, which it is for the seller. Yeah.
Right, you are. I guess the fifth thing I'd say, so you got teaser ad, NDA, personal financial statement, interview, and then it's this filtering of inquiry. It's metering the information with the degree of seriousness and the degree of maturity along that deal spectrum, Yeah. And so I'm giving more information as we get deeper and deeper and deeper into the deal. Okay. And some of that just comes with experience, There's a lot of things involved in a deal. There's a lot of little negotiations that grow into big negotiations. So the little gears that turn the medium-sized gears that turn the big gears is what I'm talking about. So like the pay plans of the individuals or the tax returns or the previous environmental studies, the real sensitive stuff will only come after the contract, right? And another thing that'll come up, and the buyer will say, well, I want to talk to the people. This thing's only valuable if the people stay. How do I get them to stay? Well, there's a right time for that too, right? So you got to be under contract for sure. And you really have to have a very good feeling that this deal is going to close, right?
Yeah.
The manufacturers come in, they've approved the new buyer, and it's a formality. Now you're dotting the I's, crossing the T's, it's going to close. Then you can start having employee engagement with potential new buyer.
Yeah. And so if a seller is working with a broker like you, this is where you are really spending a lot of time, communicating those.
Yeah. I'm quarterbacking the deal on both sides, unless there's another broker, and we're sharing that responsibility with our respective clients. But yeah, I'm quarterbacking, I'm keeping the deal on track and taking all the obstacles out of the way.
And you're doing that, I don't want to turn this into a plug for using broker, but obviously I feel like that's a big part of the transaction. If you have something that's a sellable asset, you should be with somebody who's going to be able to maintain this type of confidentiality with multiple buyers. I mean, you're coordinating buyer interests, right? So you're doing this with multiple buyers at the same time, where otherwise the management team or the seller, they're going to have to do this on their own while they're running their business. But you're doing this with multiple buyers at a time to coordinate the timing, to maximize the interest, which will maximize that ultimate purchase price ideally.
Yep. Yeah. It's an interesting dynamic. It really is. So that's confidentiality and in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's great.
It's a really important aspect of going to market, and probably the most important, because if you don't have confidentiality, you can do all the other stuff right and hurt your business.
I feel like that's why it is one of the many reasons, but one of the bigger reasons why so many sellers just walk into this late, where you're like, what the hell have you been doing? What do you mean you haven't put together an exit plan? You haven't, like, these buyers are going to want to see your numbers 3 to 5 years back, right? I mean, you don't have any of your ducks in a row. Why did that happen? And confidentiality oftentimes comes up as the main reason. They weren't ready to put it out there. They weren't ready to take that step. They weren't ready to take that risk.
Yeah. Research would say that 75 to 80% of the sellers fall into that category.
Yeah. Is it that high?
It's high. It's really high. Yeah.
Wow.
So
hopefully workshops like this can help those sellers confidentially learn about this before they reach out to someone like Hal Feder. Shameless plug, contact info below the video. But that, no, seriously, with the confidentiality, it's something.
I mean, even if you're not, to your point, even if you're 10 years away from selling, 20 years away from selling, being familiar with the process is not a bad idea.
Yeah.
Being familiar with what are the value drivers of my business is not a bad idea. So engaging a broker, you don't have to be for sale tomorrow or even in 6 months or a year. Get a trusted advocate, have them do evaluation, know where you are, know where you need to get to a number that you aspire to at one point. Check in every once in a while, see what's going on in the market. Doesn't cost anything, really. A little time, but manage the growth curve and be informed. And there's a lot of things to think about. You got working capital, you got facility, you got team, you got tax, you got regulatory and legal. There's all these categories. You got compliance, make sure your facility is going to pass the environmental. Take all the tanks out before you get into a sale.
And starting that conversation about what is important, what are the issues that should be kept confidential, it opens up the door to all those other conversations about, well, this matters and this is what you focus on to drive that valuation. And it really begins the discussion. So
if you've got frozen assets, you need $200,000 of parts and you've got 500. Well, free up those parts, clean them up before you go to market, because you're going to be at a great advantage of being ready to sell when you're ready to sell.
Yeah. All right. Well, good. Hal, we're over the 30-minute mark, so I think we should close out at that. But that was extremely valuable, and we'll see you for more of these. But that was great, Hal Feder. Your contact info will be below the video or in the podcast, wherever you're hearing this. And Hal, thank you as always.
Thank you, Adam. Always a pleasure. Appreciate it.